Which AI model is the best for churches?
Yeah, Grok and Meta were the worst. DeepSeek was the best. Perplexity, which isn't its own model. Perplexity is a model of models. So what Perplexity does is it shoots the question to like a bunch of different models, and then it picks, what it thinks is the best answer from them. So DeepSeek and Perplexity were top, but but this is like when you're doing prompts with no prompt engineering. Listen, every single platform can give you incredible responses to anything if you do good prompt engineering, or they do the thing that we're going to create with those skills.markdown files. So yeah, next question.
Should churches train their own artificial intelligence models?
Yeah, you can make small language models pretty easily now in a lot of different tools. You basically just need to put all your PDFs together, that you want it, and these are typically known as RAGs. Or you can just Google, AI RAGs, retrieval access generation. Yeah, so they're small language models. You can do stuff like that for very specific things. If you want to have basically like a walled garden of like, I only want an AI that's trained on this. So there's a foundational model that sits underneath, but everything that it works off of, is basically, what you decided to put in that. There's use cases for that. Some people, who are like high productivity types will, zip up their every email they've ever written, every document they've ever done, every book they've ever written, and, make a small language model to that end to basically clone themselves work-wise, and then throw that into co-work and, how would I think about this, kind of thing, and have a couple agents and then one that checks those, against yourself. So yeah, there's stuff like that. There's people who are doing that kind of stuff. I don't have time for, that stuff is setup intensive, but there could be use cases if you wanted to do that, Like if I wanted to create like a D.A. Carson or Tim Keller, LLM, I can do that pretty easily. I've got all the PDFs of, anything either of those guys have written. But the same sense, most of that stuff is already public, and just with prompt engineering, you can probably get a very similar response of like, hey, I only want, such and such as perspective. You're better off just doing the markdown, just doing a skills.markdown file, in the back end of, and having your people download that stuff. The other stuff is just going to be too time intensive to do it. Plus, if you go the markdown route, your people don't have to really learn prompt engineering, because everything that they would have needed to learn how to do is in that markdown file. So,
what advice would you give to church planters regarding artificial intelligence?
Okay, the first thing that you got to do is an audit of yourself, okay? And so you got to know, like, what am I good at and what am I not good at? And then of the things that I'm not good at, are there any things that are in that list that can and should be outsourced by the other kind of decision trees of when and when not to use AI? So that would be the first thing I would do, is basically put a self-audit side by side with what are these technologies good at, and are there places where there's matches? So the places where there's matches, those are going to be the places where you're going to want to go first.
How do we pastor people in the age of AI?
So what does it look like to pastor people through this era? So I think the first thing is you got to think through every environment that you have at church, okay? Now, depending on where your church is in the life cycle of, pre-planting, planting, settled, institutional, that's going to look different. In our church, Orlando Grace Church, there's like the 500, there's the 72, there's the 12, the 3, and then the crowds, right? So the crowds is, the people who aren't a part of your church. The 500 is the ecclesia, the corporate gathered worship. The 72 is like a Christian education environment. The 12 is like the community group environment. And then the 3 is like your discipleship environment. So I think you actually need to have pastoring and discipleship and edification that's happening on this subject in every single one of those environments. but what it looks like in each environment looks different. So I think when we're talking about these things from the pulpit, I think it's important for us in our illustrations to talk through AI usage in our sermons, okay? I'm not just talking about like how I used AI in the sermon. What I'm talking about is like, hey, I had lunch with so-and-so this week. I visited him in his work, and this is stuff like that, okay? But then when you start getting down into like the community group, the 12, the 3, the discipleship environment, this is where we're starting to talk about like matters of the heart and what he was saying in terms of like, okay, what is this thing doing to me? Why am I using this as opposed to something else? And thinking through the decision tree of all of those kinds of things, as well as I do think in the 72 environment where it's like Christian education, you got like Sunday school or whatever. Like I think you should have a course at some point in your Christian education model of a Christian theology of tech. And what does it look like for us to understand this technology? What do we need to all be prepared for? What are some things that are good and encouraging and exciting? What are some areas where we want to avoid pitfalls? So I think in each one of those different ministry environments, there's messages that are kind of common throughout, but what it looks like and how you talk about it and to what extent and what intimacy level that it's communicated at, it just looks.
Are there any good use cases of AI for churches?
If you think about if you've done like Brian Chappell's Christ-centered preaching, he has the EIA, explanation, illustration, application. So what you're talking about is the A. So here's a good example of how to use the A, for application here. One of the things that I always did, this is all before AI when I was preaching, is I would print out 7 different people in the congregation who were really, really different, their pictures, and I put it up around my monitor. And before I was done with my sermon, I wanted to make sure that I had specialized communication and illustrations and applications that hit the heart of all of those 7 different people. Because look, we all got some people in our church who are weird or who are outside the norm, or so you want to do stuff that hits the center of mass, the bell curve, but you need to have some stuff that's going to hit people, in different places. So if I were preaching today, and I think this is a very legitimate use case, is I would have an ongoing, here's 12 different people or 7 different profiles of people who are in the congregation. Can you analyze my illustrations and applications here and give me some ideas maybe of how many of these people am I actually hitting, in this sermon? And again, after it's done and written or whatever. And do you have any suggestions of how I can speak more to the heart of some of these different personas or profiles? I think that's a great use, yeah.
Why is it okay to use AI for cultural insight instead of building relationships?
It depends on the pastor here in this situation, okay? If it is a pastor who is lazy, or a pastor who just doesn't know his people, and he's going to rely on, cultural tropes that have been ingested by an AI platform for sermon application, that's a bad use, okay? But if you're looking for feedback as to whether or not what you have written, based on what you do know of your congregation, and whether you are being comprehensive enough, that's where I would say that's a good use case.
Thank you for watching. To learn more information on this topic, please visit www.thegospelcoalition.org/AI-Christian-benchmark.